Let's give Antonio a welcome. Thanks for joining us all the way from Paris. And now we get to see you in the real life and not only on radio. So that's wonderful. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Without further ado, I think that despite another introduction by Stefan was announced, it's better if we just stick to the schedule and the program, and let's go on with my own presentation, which in a way continues and complexifies some of the points that we have already discussed, because my take on transparency is by focusing on the what we consider the negative space of transparency, which is privacy actually. And the title of my presentation today is Negotiating Privacy and Transparency, a Digital Labor ? And we will try and answer this question: to what extent producing privacy is our labor as users of digital platforms especially. I would like to start by coming back again to what has been said about the leak movement that has been developing in the last decade, and of course the whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning or like Edward Snowden or of course some of the evil masterminds, in the way they are described in the US media, especially like Julian Assange, are important figureheads of this leak movement. But beyond them, there is a huge amount of persons who've been, and of collectives who have been actively putting online, corporate databases mainly, and in some cases also government databases. And of course this has created, because they are related to hacks and some illegal or semi-legal acts, a certain legal flu around the very movement. And especially the leaks were intended or are intended to prompt a reaction in civil society and to denounce the digital military-industrial complex. Unfortunately for us, if we focus on Western countries and Europe in particular, despite all the goodwill and all the discourses about the importance of privacy in Europe, what we can see is that the reaction of having put mass electronic surveillance in the open has been quite strange and paradoxical in a way. The unexpected outcome in the last few years of major revelations, such as those of Edward Snowden, has been that instead of correcting securitarian surveillance excesses, many countries like France, for instance, seems to crank up the surveillance even more. If we look at France in particular, because I like to focus on this topic, because that's the country I live in the last 2 years, it has passed 4 major bills that represent, according to the Quadrature du Net, which is a major association for the defense of human rights and free speech and privacy online, represents major violations of human rights. I'm of course mentioning the military planning law of 2013, the anti-terror law of 2014, and the 2 renseignement law and surveillance law that passed actually this year, and the international surveillance law was actually passed 2 days ago. And these laws basically create a legal framework for forced transparency of communications, but also create a legal framework that instigates opaqueness and opacity when it comes to the accountability of governments in general. And so what they are doing with our data and what is happening, especially in terms of surveillance, what is the kind of statistical treatment of these personal data that are collected by relying on digital platforms. The point that we have to address is that surveillance has become to an extent participatory, and that the very nature of electronic mass surveillance today has to rely on some kind of action that is performed by us as users. This image that you see here, and I suppose that you're all pretty much familiar with it, is the first slide that was actually leaked by Edward Snowden in June 2013, and mentions a number of very prominent and well-known digital platforms such as Facebook, Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, YouTube, Skype, and so on and so on. And all these platforms have been contributing more or less willing to the prison program. Well, more or less willing, because of course there is a lot of there is a very huge grey area around the kind of implications of these major corporations. But apparently the point is that the data that were collected were provided by users of those platforms. And this is the important point that we want to develop here. The fact that mass surveillance every day has become what some refer to as a participatory panopticon, meaning a system where surveillance is actually performed by the very object, the very targets of surveillance, meaning us. And so we have, according to others, and I'm thinking about Slavoj Žižek, moved away from the big brother paradigm of surveillance, and we are now in a big other paradigm of surveillance, meaning the other is watching us, or we are watching each other, and we are actually participating in this kind of surveillance. So where does privacy come in? Well, in a way, privacy is something that has been discussed by major, well, in some cases representatives of those platforms, especially because it has been presented as something that is now over, is now finished. The hypothesis of the end of privacy has been, well, presented in the media and featured in the media prominently in the last 15 years, actually. And if we think about, I don't know, Jeff Jarvis, who in 2011 published a book called Public Parts, he recycled Jürgen Habermas' idea of publicness and turned it into some kind of Facebook-flavored gimmick by saying that our identity is today public by default. And if we look at those who have actually said that privacy is over, well, not surprisingly, they all come from a very specific professional background. And by this I mean that starting from 1999 with Scott McNealy, the CEO of Sun Microsystem, and well, arriving in 2013 with Eric Schmidt's executive chairman of Google, we have well, some very good quotes that we can now quickly see here. You have zero privacy anyway, get over it. That was Scott McNealy in 1999. And of course, I think the most well known is the sentence that was pronounced by Mark Zuckerberg in 2010 when he introduced frictionless sharing on Facebook, and it goes like this: public is the new social norm. Of course, as a sociologist by training, each time a CEO of a major corporation talks about social norm, I have a bit of a shiver up my spine, because first of all, it's supposed to be my job to define what's a social norm. I mean, in a way to study it at least. But then on the other side, whenever we have a CEO of a company trying to define a social norm, one has to suspect that there is probably some kind of ideological undercurrent going on there. And if we look, for instance, at what Vinton Cerf, the chief internet evangelist at Google, said in 2013, this kind of ideological meta-narrative is quite visible. At a conference held at the Federal Trade Commission in 2013, Vinton Cerf said privacy may actually be an anomaly, a historical anomaly, it said. And he developed by saying that before industrialization and urbanization, meaning our society used to be a non-privacy society characterized by communal sharing of information, and everybody used to know everything about everybody else. And eventually industrialization and urbanization changed this kind of framework, and privacy was invented, but privacy is, well, some kind of a exception, and we are ready to, well, get over it again and go back to our natural state, which is characterized by communal sharing. Of course, beyond these, we can actually see that these tech giants and their figureheads act as moral entrepreneurs, meaning they act as personal, in some case collective, social actors that want to change some social norm and want to enforce new social norms, and they also aim to, well, definition, to the definition of a certain ideology of a world without privacy. And this ideology, of course, relies, as I was saying, to a meta-narrative, to a historical meta-narrative that goes pretty much like this. We have a pre-privacy world, then we have privacy, and then we are ready to move into the post-privacy world, which is characterized by harmony and openness among primary circles of socialization. And these circles of socialization, of course, are accessible to us via our Facebook account. Privacy, from that point of view, is described as a byproduct of modern industrialization and urbanization. But the point is that this kind of description, this kind of ideological meta-narrative and historical meta-narratives are erroneous, and they are, of course, ideologically motivated. Erroneous from a historical point of view, because if we rely, for instance, on the work of Philippe Pariès and other French historians that have actually targeted the notion of privacy and the emergence of the private sphere, we see that it's not around the 18th, 19th century with industrialization and urbanization that privacy emerges, but before that date. Actually, the emergence of a private sphere predates industrialization, and it has to be situated historically around the end of the Middle Ages, where eventually we actually witnessed a disruption of the kind of feudal solidarities that characterized the medieval system, and of course the kind of disruption of the lineage and religious community that characterized our society before that. And of course, when I say disruption, I also mean that we actually witnessed the emergence of new technologies of the self, as Michel Foucault would have said, like for instance the widespread writing and printing, especially the practice of analyzing oneself through diaries and logs, and of course this is something that goes on online via online disclosure of personal information, first with blogs and then of course with the social media today. And then the second point that characterizes this disruption of this pre-privacy world is also the emergence of new egalitarian relationships, so not relying on hierarchies or on loyalties like the feudal ones, but the emphasis is on friendship and on horizontal social structures. And of course, again, look at Facebook and the importance of the metaphor of friendship on that specific platform. And the third characteristic that identifies this emergence of a private sphere at the end of the Middle Ages is also the reconfiguration of our living spaces, like with the emergence of the nuclear family and private accommodations. And so that's the end of the, ancient villa, like a communal space for entire families and groups of workers that actually work for the family. But we focus on private accommodation, smaller ones and smaller spaces. So from a historical point of view, we see that what has been said by big tech and big platforms is probably needs to be complexified and needs to be probably also redefined when it comes to the dates. But most importantly, if we look at some of the data we have at our disposal today, we see that there is a lot of, let's say, a lot of coercion going on when it comes to sharing, and that sharing is not something that people are that comfortable about. And if we, for instance, look at how Facebook has increasingly made users' information public by default, like in this data visualization that focuses on the information that is available by default on any Facebook profile. And we start in 2005, and what we see here, okay, each one of these circles represent the available information on a Facebook profile. We see, I don't know, the date of your birthday, the name of your friends, your contact information, or your pictures, your name, and so on and so on. The blue area is the one which is public by default. And we start in 2005, and we arrive in 2010, and as you see, what has been happening is that Facebook has made public by default a huge amount of information starting from 2005 and then arriving in 2010. And this, of course, also coincides with the time when Mark Zuckerberg pronounced his famous sentence, "Public is the new social norm." Yes, it is the new social norm because you made it. But when it comes to the reaction of the users, we see that something interesting is going on, because when users are given the chance of opting out from these this kind of disclosure, what happens is that they actually opt out. And this is actually a database that comes from Carnegie Mellon University, and it covers pretty much the same time span. It goes from 2005 to 2011, and actually what we see is that here what is marked in red represents information that is left public by the users. What is in blue becomes private, so it's something that meaning that users opt out from sharing this kind of information. And what is this information? Well, basically, I don't know where you go, where is your high school, what is your hometown, what's your favorite music, what's your favorite movies, so also cultural preferences, what's your favorite book, but also political affiliation, your phone, your address. So in some cases, data relative to your demographic, in some other cases relative to your tastes and preferences. And what we see is that started in 2005, where pretty much everything is in red, meaning that people were not that careful about the sharing of this kind of information. Eventually, something happens around 2008, 2009, and everybody decides to go dark, or well, actually to go blue, which means that they decide to opt out from the public by default option that was enforced by Facebook. So what actually has been going on is that Facebook has been, well, Facebook, we focus on Facebook because that's the mainstream social media so far, and we have 1.5 billion of people going on, sharing things pretty much on that platform. What has been going on with Facebook is that this platform has been experiencing periodical privacy incidents, sometimes actually, provoked or prompted by decisions made by its CEO or by prominent officials. And the reaction to those privacy incidents has been, not very peaceful in terms of what the users have been doing about it. Users have been protesting and have been organizing, have been involving governments, regulators, and government agencies. And what has been the reaction of Facebook facing all these uproars and protests? Well, in many cases, Facebook has been backpedaling and compromising a lot. See table in the next slide, says my slide. Well, actually, don't worry, we won't read all this, but it's just to give you an idea of the sheer amount of information that we have so far, and also of the way I spend my nights, compiling this. The tables like these, which actually list all the historical occurrences of privacy incidents. That's the first column. So we see that started in 2006 and finishing in 2013. We have a number of privacy incidents that sometimes are like the introduction of new features, like the introduction of the news feed in 2006, or more recently the Facebook bug, which was some kind of a Facebook scare that went on in France mainly, and even more recently, the introduction of Internet.org, the new Facebook initiative aimed at connecting the next billion users, mainly South Asia and Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And all these features, were problematic from the point of view of privacy because by aggregating information or by sharing information, they were basically changing the very audiences and the targets of this information. So the reaction, that's the second column, of our users have been in general uproars and protests. At the beginning, these protests were not very organized. At the beginning, in 2006, basically, it was 300,000 members of Facebook, and some estimates say 700,000 members of Facebook, which at the time was 1/3 of the entire platform user base, that protested and wanted this newsfeed to be removed. And as in many cases, and that's the last column, the reaction from Facebook was mainly, apologizing, but not really apologizing. Apologizing and saying, okay, we will try and change that, but then eventually they don't, or they reintroduce it in another way. So basically, what Facebook has been doing is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's like tango. And that's been going on for 10 years now. And what happened, for instance, in 2013, 2015, is that around the internet.org, a number of advocacy groups have been raising some concerns as to the privacy of the users and the fact that information was not encrypted. And then eventually what Facebook decided was to change the name of the internet.org app. So basically, this was it. Actually, the point is that, and this is the most important part to us, users are more and more organized. At the beginning, they were just protesting in the wild, let's put it like this, and eventually they started, involving the Federal Trade Commission, or started petitions on moveon.org, or eventually also involving the French Data Authority and other organizations. So basically the idea is that there is something that resembles a movement going on, a movement in terms of awareness, in terms of privacy. And I don't have time to develop this, so I would just skip it, because actually I made my point by saying that the ideological discourse around the end of privacy is, again, motivated by economic interests, but this kind of discourse also hides political and economic tensions, and there is a full-fledged cultural war going on around confidentiality, anonymity, think about the name war, the pseudonym war going on, and of course secrecy and transparency. And this war also has to do with our changing definition of privacy. The privacy that we know or that we have learned from school is the one which was defined by Louis Brandeis and Samuel Warren in 1890 in their article, The Right to Privacy, which actually was mainly designed to protect the private life of celebrities and politicians and influential citizens who at the time were threatened by the intrusion of gossip press and the media. And the media at the time would basically photojournalism. So the idea that Louis Brandeis and Samuel Warren came up with was the idea of recognizing a new right, the right to be left alone. Now the problem is that on social media nobody wants to be left alone, and that's exactly the point of sharing online. The point is that I'm not signing up, on a digital platform to be alone. On the contrary, I want to select my audience. I want to have some kind of control over the information I share. And of course, I want to probably be less concerned by this kind of paradigm of privacy, which is the old one, which is the one that we inherited from Brandeis and Warren. This is the privacy that we describe as privacy as penetration, meaning that we have some kind of concentric spheres of data, more and more private, as we move towards the center. At the center, we see the user or the citizen, which is surrounded, who is surrounded by his or her own private, sensitive data, but these data are, according to this kind of paradigm of privacy, always the same for everyone, meaning, for your political affiliation, your health status, your sexual preferences, your religion, your religious beliefs. These are supposed to be, in this old paradigm of privacy, the same sensitive data for everyone. And we share those data only with selected persons, and then as we move away from the center, we share less private information or less sensitive information with more and more persons, and as we reach the public, of course, we tend to just exchange platitudes, probably. The point is that this model does not apply anymore, and this model is also too concerned with the kind of invasion of privacy that, yes, we experience, but we experience in a different way. The invasion of privacy perceived as a penetration towards the center, the core of this sphere, is not the situation that we live every day. Our present-day paradigm of privacy is something that resembles more of a negotiation, and a multi-level negotiation, if you want. It's pretty much our everyday experience when we sign up to a digital platform. We just create an account, and then we want to know what kind of information we can share, so we just probe or try and publish something and see the reaction from the platform. And from the platform I mean from the social environment, our friends, our circle of friends on this platform, but also from the very platform, meaning from the censors and moderators of the platform itself. Just to give you a clear example, it's my first day on Facebook. Can I share a picture of me, I don't know, at the seaside, on the beach, semi-naked? Is it something that is acceptable given the standards and regulations of this platform? Well, the only way to know it is just publish it and see what happens. What happens is sometimes the picture is removed by the platforms. In some other cases, it is not removed. But we have different feedbacks from our circle of friends. In some cases, they will like it, and so we are invited to share more of this kind of information. In some other cases, it is considered to be embarrassing or completely inappropriate. So in this case, we will try and change our way of communicating, and we will not share this kind of information anymore. So it's not the same kind of a way of defining what's sensitive and what's not, and what's public. Of course, sensitivity of the data and of the information we share changes according to the platform we are on. For instance, again, think about your sexual orientation. You don't want to share it in the old model of privacy, but it's in the new model of privacy. I don't know if you're on a dating website or on a dating app, you want to share your sexual information. This is actually what gives you access to the persons you are interested in. Or for instance, medical information and health status. You don't want to share it in the old model, but in the new model, of course, on some platforms, you are interested in disclosing this kind of information. So again, the point is that privacy has now become more of a collective negotiation, and this also means that it ceased to be, to an extent, an individual right. A collective negotiation means that the persons and the groups of people that are involved in this kind of negotiation, of course, go over our own personal and private sphere. There is nothing more public and more collective than a private data from that point of view. What we mean by this is that whenever we share our information online, we are in a way taking into account the collective negotiation with the platform, the governments, think about the kind of laws and legal standards in your community or in your nation, and of course our audiences, the public that will eventually react to our information. And here we arrive to the final part of our presentation, and also to the part where digital labor factors in. All the data that we share online also have to be considered as a huge economic resource for the platforms that stimulate this kind of sharing. And we cannot understand what's going on with our privacy if we do not understand the dynamics of entrepreneurial value capture. value capture, or in general, means that companies are increasingly relying on us to produce content and to produce data that they will eventually monetize, and they are increasingly engaged in the use of property rights as means of capturing value produced beyond the corporation, meaning beyond what a company like Facebook or Twitter or Google actually does, but produced by the free labor of the users. So we, in a way, have to consider data production as labor provided by online audiences and captured by platforms. And this also has to do a lot with the changing ratio between value creation and value capture in today's digital platforms and digital environments in general. And this is where a new and emergent research field, the research field of digital labor studies, can come handy to understand what's going on with our privacy, because from the point of view, from the economic point of view of these platforms, what we face in here is, a coordinating mechanism that prompts users to generate content and to generate data that, in many cases, the data actually hides behind the content. Just to give you a quick example, if you publish a picture of your cat playing piano, which is fantastic, to you this is content, but to Facebook this is metadata, meaning what's hiding beyond the content, which basically means, I don't know, your name, the timestamp, the very brand of the camera that you use to take that picture, your IP address, and so on and so on. And all this data, of course, is the important part, meaning the part which is actually monetized by these platforms. From that point of view, many have insisted recently on the idea of understanding our online presence as a form of digital labor. Labor because it produces value for these platforms, and this labor sits on a continuum along a continuum between unpaid labor, meaning something that we do for free, like for instance our everyday activity via our devices or our Facebook account and so on. But they also can be micro-paid tasks. For those of you who are familiar with Amazon Mechanical Turk or any other micro-work platforms, basically these are platforms where people are invited to do the same things they do on mainstream platforms, but they are micro-paid. For instance, I don't know, you click or you share or you like or you view or you watch a video and you're paid 0.005 cents. So this is micro work, and this, of course, deserves micro payment. The point is that these tasks, which are largely indistinguishable from leisure, sharing, and sociability, can be described as labor as far as they fulfill four criteria. The first one is the fact that these clicks and likes and shares produce value. They produce value for the platforms, and of course this has a lot to do with for-sale data, with the role of data brokers and other intermediaries, and of course the very structure of the advertising market today, which is now based on personalized advertising and micro-segmentation of the markets, and of course also real-time bidding. I won't go into that. The second criterion to define these activities as labor is the fact that they are framed in contractual terms, and these terms, you all accept them. They are the terms of service, and despite the fact that the terms of service are not, legally speaking, labor contract, they define what platforms will do with the outcome of your clicks and share and so on. Third point, they are subject to performance evaluation. Think about all the scores, all the number of shares and likes and all the markers that actually evaluate your performance online and the time you spend online. And the fourth criterion is that all these tasks are somehow submitted to a requirement to contribute. In some cases also an injunction to contribute. I don't know if you are familiar with LinkedIn or with Tumblr. These are all platforms that eventually will prompt you to death to participate. Oh, there is an invitation waiting for you, and they send you 4 or 5 reminders to get you on the platform. How many minutes do I have? 3 more? Less? Finished? Okay, let me go quickly. Just I want to finish by just pointing to, well, probably our hope for the future. At the intersection of digital platform, metadata and structure and labor awareness, there is a growing movement of persons and groups of people who are interested in, well, using privacy laws to actually raise this kind of labor awareness. And for instance, you are probably familiar with the kind of class actions that have been targeting Google and Facebook around sponsored contents, meaning these platforms use our pictures and contents to promote brands. And of course, these are class actions that have been going on for a number of years now. And the final one, this is a major one that has been going on for a number of years now. It's the NGO called Europe versus Facebook, the one that was single-handedly responsible for invalidating the safe harbor deal. And I think that you've read it in the paper, but they also launched last year in 2014 a major class action in Austria, and in this class action 25,000 Facebook users asked Facebook to recognize the value of the data they produced by paying a symbolic amount of money, 500 euros per person. Again, it's just a symbolic amount, but it is representative of the kind of conflicts that actually, emerge at the confluence between privacy awareness and digital labor awareness. I just want to thank you, and I also want to prompt the discussion for our workshop in the afternoon, which I will be co-facilitating with my colleagues Samuel Guetta and Jérôme Denis. And the prompt for you is, how do you produce data? This is basically the question that we will be asking, and hopefully from now to this afternoon you will have enough time to come up with ideas, answers, remarks, and so on. Thank you very much.